Hello everyone, I am Sergio Maldonado and this is Masters of Privacy, a set of interviews covering the intersection of marketing, data, privacy and technology with a clear goal in mind, which is redefining the relationship between people, brands and media around transparency and control. Which is to say, we're aiming for real customer centricity, or if you will, human centricity. We regularly talk to DPOs, CMOs, CDOs, and whoever else we find interesting and able to share valuable insights. So we hope you like it. Please do reach out if you have any ideas on future topics or speakers. Welcome again. We have Cristiana Santos and Victor Morel with us today. Cristiana Santos is an assistant professor in privacy and data protection law at Utrecht University in the Netherlands, holding both a doctoral degree in law, science and technology from the University of Bologna in Italy, and a Ph.D. in computer science from the University of Luxembourg. She is an expert of the data protection unit at the Council of Europe, besides many other things that you will find in the show notes, and she was a lawyer prior to all this, to joining academia. Victor Morel holds a Ph.D. in computer science from INRIA and works at the Security and Privacy Lab of Chalmers University in Gothenburg, in Sweden. He is now exploring usable privacy for IoT applications, and his research covers privacy and data protection and many other things that you will find also in the show notes. They both do a lot of stuff. Cristiana and Victor, together with Victor Fredholm and Adam Thunberg, have co-authored a recent paper titled Legitimate Interest is the New Consent, Large-Scale Measurement and Legal Compliance of IAB Europe TCF paywalls. So this is a good segue to now direct our attention to publishers and the open market, since we had already debated the consent or pay model in the context of Instagram, Facebook, so Meta, in recent interviews, right? So Robert Bateman in the English channel and Jorge Garcia Herrero in the Spanish channel. This means that we're going to look at the IAB's Transparency and Consent Framework, which is now in version 2.2, after the findings of the European Data Protection Board's Cookie Banner Task Force, if it rings a bell. And after the uncertainty that surrounds the upcoming decision at the CJEU on the validity of the TCF itself. We will also try to understand the challenges and potential conflicts of interest faced by CMPs, or Consent Management Platform vendors. Let's get started. Cristiana, Victor, thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Sergio.
It's our pleasure.
Congrats on the papers, and the latest one you have is very timely because everyone is having this debate about consent, the price of consent, but you've discovered new things to the paper. Which are the insights that most surprised you?
I can start and then Victor can add. As an assistant professor in the School of Law of Utrecht University, I teach tracking. But in order to understand a little bit more about the legal violations of online tracking, it's important then to exchange with computer scientists like Victor to make more experiments and to go deeper into how these technologies work. And so last year, our story starts already last year when we started our work on cookie paywalls, right? And so last year we understood that most websites that deploy cookie paywalls are actually IAB TCF-based. And then Victor made some nice discoveries regarding these cookie paywalls, and we know that the IAB TCF now is being very scrutinized, right? So today, the IAB TCF is being analyzed at the highest court of Europe, in the Court of Justice of the EU. So our paper has gained this very big momentum, especially because of cookie paywalls, right? So websites deploying cookie paywalls are IAB TCF based. And one of the discoveries is that, let's start with the first one. There is some complicated understanding at EU level about whether cookie paywalls are lawful or not. And even if we have 28 data protection authorities, only 4 brought to their position. And these positions, right, these opinions on the lawfulness of the TCF, on the lawfulness of cookie paywalls, are not in harmonization whatsoever. So, for example, the German says, even if the guidelines are very prone to the understanding that cookie paywalls might be lawful in certain situations, afterwards, the German decision said, well, pay or okay model might not be legal at all. This was a decision, very recent one, for an online newspaper. Then the Spanish DPA says, yes, cookie paywalls are indeed lawful if the users are informed of it and if there are alternatives that are offered, right? And then the French Data Protection Authority, already with its guidelines from last year, says, well, paywalls can be lawful, but under certain evaluative criteria. If the price is fair, if there is a fair remuneration for publishers, and if there is a real and fair alternative. So it's a little bit dubious regarding this criteria. And then the Austrian Data Protection Authority also has some dubious position, not very clear. So yes, paywalls are admissible, but users must have the possibility to say yes. So 4 DPAs and 2 are not very clear or present very specific criteria. So only on a case-based analysis is possible to understand the outcome. Any legal expert, any computer scientist, any professional would be very confused, or would actually take advantage of this confusion or this legal loophole, right? But indeed, this kind of hampers this desired level playing field for website publishers, because some are okay to implement a fee, right? But others are constrained. So this is fantastic environment for industry to test and adopt more and more business models. Actually, now, 2 weeks ago, we found one more cookie paywall that is a mix of a pay or okay model. So when users actually consent to tracking and avoid paying the fee, right? They afterwards, after checking one more article or browsing a little bit more, they will be confronted with a paywall. So a request to pay, to subscribe, to have full access to the website and not be tracked. So it's fantastic.
So, first, we had a debate last week about this, but maybe your opinion first. Do you think it is lawful? Do you think this is free consent?
That is a very nice question. I think that cookie paywalls can be a potential legitimate business model if the consent requests provides all the necessary information regarding the third-party trackers, right? So who is going to track the user, of which personal data, under which purposes, right? And if the user chooses to pay, the users cannot be tracked. So under very concrete circumstances, a cookie paywall model could become lawful, which it's not the case at the very moment, especially when when consumers face a cookie paywall. It's this request of the first layer is already full of manipulative practices in terms of colors, in terms of nudging the user to consent and not to pay, and the other way around. So it's very complicated, and a big effort needs to be done until we could say cookie paywalls are indeed legitimate. But we know websites need to provide for themselves, right? But as of today, no.
Okay, so your opinion is actually quite business friendly, I'll say.
If the consent request is freely given, indeed, if it obeys to the legal requirements for consent, and if the user, if pays, is not tracked, which is not happening at the moment.
Since also in this case, according to your paper, or according to the CEO of Content Pass, I think I remember that 99 point something % of people do consent instead of paying, then there is plenty of room to ask them properly. So that if you are going to be using advertising, then why go for dark patterns or something really simple and convenient when you can do it properly? Victor, maybe let's see what you think. What's your opinion on that?
As Chris pointed out, this legal uncertainty is actually just room for new business models. And so new business practices are created without the law having a word to say in it. And it's not necessarily for the best, I would say. I understand that newspapers need to make a living and that this relying on advertising is not necessarily a great situation. But I'm not convinced that this model is actually a healthier one for them either. Like indeed, Content Pass CEO was like mentioning that most people will actually never pay for accessing the website. So it seems that it's more of an illusion than anything else. It's more like a pretense that they want to comply with the law, but they're not exactly switching business model. I mean, for me, the best argument so far is like the one from Noibs, that well, privacy is a human right, and it might not be a good idea to actually trade it for money directly. Also, and that's also like one thing that we mentioned more directly in our previous paper from last year. Your consent is worth 75 euros. Uh, yeah. And now in this new paper, it's also interesting because we were like first investigating the paywalls, the cookie paywalls, like one business practice, should we say? But we also unveiled some technical realities of how the TCF is working in practice, because they're like claiming a lot of things and they're like, yeah, trying to comply with the law for sure. But for me, one of the most interesting finding was that the TCF is flawed, I would say, by design. It's not like terribly flawed, but it is technically not perfect. And it is designed in a way that it's also easy to misuse it. For instance, you can, when you're a publisher and you want to use the TCF in your cookie banners, for instance, using a CMP, you can define both purposes on consent and legitimate interest. But it's actually unlawful to do it for both at the same time. It's an either. It's like this or this one. And the way it's done, the way it's technically designed, makes that most people nowadays just like ask for consent and legitimate interest at the same time. So in case you don't ask for consent, then they will fall back on legitimate interest.
Yeah, the TCF is funded for more than 1,000 websites in Europe. So this is kind of unlawful processing at scale and by default, right?
Yes. If you're trying to ask for consent, you can very easily ask for all vendors possible, which are like hundreds of different vendors that will get access to your visitors' data, including like terrible data brokers that have been like judged as breaching privacy on large scale before. And this is all accessible.
Criteo.
Yes, Oracle, for instance, Criteo, Axiom, all of those. And it's just like one click away, basically, when you're defining your cookie banner. one click away. So technically, we also should make things better for people that have to comply with the law, and like provide them with like better technical solution. We're not even sure that actually this TCF 2.2 update, which will like restrict the purposes legally allowed for a legitimate interest, will be sufficient, because we have reasons to believe that it might still be able to circumvent this technical limitation. The thing is, the TCF said, well, we will make sure that everyone will follow the rules, and they will probably monitor, etc. But I mean, that's a lot of website, and if it's like easier to just circumvent the law, and you will eventually get caught up later with the fine, well, you will just conduct business as usual.
I mean, the IAB TCF has this CMP compliance plan, but as of today, and we have a paper that confirms it, CMPs have a lot of leverage regarding the user interface, and CMPs actually sell additional services to publishers, like scanning services, which actually manipulate publishers. Even when a website is empty, the scanner report brings there is a cookie here, so you need to provide a privacy policy. Or the other way around, the scanners that CMPs provide do not function well in terms of detecting all the trackers that exists on the publisher's website, especially omit fingerprinting. So be careful, publishers, on the CMPs that you might select to be compliant.
So if people are at the IAB and they want to comply with the law, the first thing they discover here is that things are not as they seemed. Because after the EDPB cookie banner task force, I had understood for one that the conflating legitimate interest and consent was something that had been overcome. So you can help them better define the framework. After all the people that have put time into that, that's badly done. And then the other layer, also on the business space, before we go into the consumer side. On the business side, there's the other layer, which is the CMP. And Cristiana, that's very interesting because there seems to be a conflict of interest as well. If I'm selling the CMP, I want to place it in as many pages as I can because I'm going to be charging you as a publisher. And then I'm also selling a higher acceptance rate. So I am motivated to use dark patterns because that's my selling point, isn't it?
So in our former work with my computer scientists colleagues at INRIA, we discovered that CMPs do not store the choice that the users made. So if users rejected consent, this choice was not communicated upstream to the vendors. And so the signals would be different, right? We also understood that let me remember, right? That CMPs, for example, Quantcast, installs a script in the cookie banner and tracks users themselves. Yes, and actually this was fantastic to know because 1 month later this cookie was not there. So publishers are not aware when CMPs are tracking by their own or not. They can put and take out their own trackers as they want. This was the case of Quantcast, right? On another paper, we discovered that the consent, the user's preferences, right, are stored before even the user makes a choice to reject, to accept. We analyzed before as well that some banners did not offer the option for users to refuse consent, and there were also pre-selected purposes. But this is not the overall.
But it's also something that we found out in this current paper, actually, that some publishers are going for this pay or okay solution. And if you pay, you can actually still be tracked. and you can eventually opt out, but you have to go down the settings and like click through several layers, and then you can opt out of this data collection. So sure, they're collecting less data that way, but still they are, while claiming that they won't collect any like extra personal data on you. They're still doing it.
Exactly. They are still doing it today. And yes, another tricky thing that CMPs do. So let us understand, on the CMPs that are providing a service to the publishers, services that are normally called scanning services, right? And for example, I remember that it was One Trust, right? That in these scanning services were missing some certain technologies. Were actually only detecting cookies and nothing else. So this is very dangerous for publishers, because they might miss to process data under a lawful legal basis, right? And this might put publishers in a very risky compliant and non-compliant situation, right? And yes, and also CMPs in their scanning services deceive publishers in their scanning services. I think CookieBot and CookieScript are very interesting examples of non-compliant scanning services. Even when there were no cookies on an empty website, the report, I remember, said you need to add cookie compliance with an exclamation point.
Of course, they need to sell. So let me then move on to the consumer side, the individual side, the data subject. Then what can we do? So things that I've seen spreading, and I've contributed myself to that. Since the browser is not enough to make it convenient to have some agency, then we've seen all sorts of tools to first populate CMPs on your behalf. I believe the one I'm using now is Consentomatic, but I need to check. There's been other tools. Brave then has released their own tool to simply wipe them out. So then if it's an opt-in scenario, wiping them out means no, because you need to expressly say yes. But there's people saying that if you deploy these tools, then you're cheating on the website because you do not give them an opportunity to ask you. How do you see this?
I also recommend Consentomatic. I think it's quite useful just to avoid this noise of cookie banners on the web, indeed. But it brings some question, because typically for cookie paywalls, in the term we have like a wall. So those tools might not necessarily be able to actually go through and like just remove the paywall. And it's also like, as you say, maybe cheating. I mean, do we want to actually break the contract, although it's not necessarily a fair one? It's maybe not the best exit, let's say, to this quagmire. So it's quite of a tricky situation. I mean, of course, we would like to have like simple tools that will like go through all of that. Firefox actually tried to also embed a similar solution into their settings, but they're also opening the door to like a slippery slope, something which I analyzed in another paper this year, published at the International Workshop on Privacy Engineering, because Firefox also let the possibility to like automatically click on consent. So what you call like populating the CMP might also be done in a unlawful way. And some people are, including like good people like Firefox, are also like going down this path. So we have to be very careful when we take this kind of approach.
So, and where is Do Not Track now, Cristiana?
So DNT does not have a heavy support from industry. We know that. But interestingly, we know that last week German courts ruled that DNT signals need to be respected, and actually can signify privacy choices, actually objections under Article 21, number 5 of the GDPR, right? So this was very important, not only for DNT per se, but also for any other emergent privacy signals. So, for example, in Europe, there is a new, in demo state, but in a new privacy signal being built by the ONG NOIB called ADPC. So it is called the Advanced Data Protection Control, right? To communicate privacy decisions and to how to say, somehow end up with these cookie banners, these annoying cookie banners for dark patterns. It's still in a demo state. We are studying it. We have studied it together with Victor and with other colleagues. And until we do not have a ruling, especially from maybe from the EDPB, the European Data Protection Board, or above, to state the enforceability of these signals, it is hard to advance, because who then expects to endorse and to make use of these tools, like the DNT that is hardly used?
Okay, let me finish with one question. So your paper has plenty of references, findings, so we'll have a link to that for whoever hasn't read it. The title also is very interesting to me. The very idea of legitimate interest is the new consent. Since consent is such an annoyance, but we know we have to do it because of e-privacy, writing to the device, reading from the device. If our hands were not tied by the Privacy Directive 5.3, and we could avoid consent, knowing what we now know after Bundeskartelamt, also your paper, that consent is sort of imposed for behavioral targeting. Do you see a future in which publishers can make a living without annoying consent requests?
Let me try out. So legitimate interest is not a solution whenever the other legal bases do not fit. We cannot forget that this legal basis is open-ended, requires interpretation per purpose in a concrete context, right? So it's important always to understand its scope and its concrete application. But more important than that is that the legitimate interest requires a balancing test when whatever the processing is. So publishers need to understand that they might need to justify always the data collection if such processing, if such purpose overrides the data subject interests and rights. So there is always a need for a balancing decision for every sort of processing. So we cannot say that legitimate interest legal basis can be the future. Always requires this balancing decision, and only then potentially these legal bases can be used for processing. It's not a happy decision, but we cannot forget the usefulness and the dangers of these legal bases, right?
Yeah.
Indeed, I think it's a great comment that you had here, Cristiana. And if I could complement, maybe, is that if we start to rely on another legal basis to collect data such as legitimate interest, because it's healthier, let's say, from a democratic point of view, for instance, then we also have to dig the question of why do we need this data, and then ultimately we'll have to ask why do we continue behavioral advertising, and that's, I think, the real question that we have to ask now. I'm not saying that I have an answer. Like someone asked me earlier in the year, yeah, but what kind of business model do you propose? And I'm no economist. I don't know. But I think the economists should definitely start answering this question, because it's a big one. And if we don't really address this elephant in the room, I'm not sure we can go anywhere, actually.
Victor, that's fantastic.
My final thought is that there is a lot to study regarding cookie paywalls. Even if there are possibilities that this business model can be lawful under very concrete circumstances, right? There is a lot to study because as of today, this model is unlawful as is. Even if users pay, they are tracked. When users consent, they consent to hundreds of companies, data brokers, data management platforms, building profiles and selling them that are feeding actually automated decision-making systems that are discriminative and that feed bias, etc. Today, this business model is not okay. There is still a lot to do. In our former paper with Victor, we understand that a cookie paywall can be presented to a user in France, and another type of cookie paywall can be presented to another user with different price. So we don't know whether this is some sort of geographic price discrimination here, you see. So we need to do much more investigation regarding cookie paywalls and also understand whether users actually would pay to other types of publishers with other types of content. In our recent paper, we understood, and Victor can confirm, that cookie paywalls go beyond news. They are now into business and to leisure content. And so, are users going to pay for the websites that they actually visit as of now? What is the willingness to pay? Right? So much more studies need to come and investigate thoroughly the user's perspective, right? The publisher CMP's perspective, and the business and the economical side revolving all of these business model.
If I can just add one more thing as well, is that indeed we would like to investigate a little bit more whether this like geographical differences truly impact the presentation of these cookie paywalls. And also something that we realized recently is that Content Pass typically is not a CMP. It's an SMP, it's a subscription management platform. And we are not sure what's its role at the moment, technically and legally, if it's like a data controller, a data processor, and like, because it's a new actor in the ad tech ecosystem as well, this like SMP. So this is also something that we would like to look at. And just a bit of advertising for us as well, maybe, is that I'm going to present the paper in Copenhagen at CCS on November 26th. So if some folks are attending the conference and the workshop WPS, please feel free to to see my presentation.
We'll add a link to that for sure. Thank you and good luck with it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Okay, that's all for today. And you will find some episode notes and links to our social channels on mastersofprivacy.com. Thank you for listening.